Well, ownership, I would like to formulate it in a different way. I don't think we have to talk about ownership, but about the use right we have as citizens within the city. How can we use the public but also the private spaces that are available? And when it comes down to use rights, there are different new models being developed all over the world, and definitely also in Europe. There's a lot of experimentation being done, like here in Coté Kanal in Brussels, where people try to rethink how they can use space, which spaces could be public for everybody here in Brussels, but also spaces public to those joining a project like here in Coté Kanal, and those spaces that should be private, those spaces that you really want for yourself as a citizen. So I think we really need to think the concept of ownership in terms of use rights. Different models have been developed already in that sense. For example, think of community land trust initiatives, various forms of cooperative living, collaborative housing more in general, with a lot of variation across Europe in forms, in models, in size as well. Well, in the past, we've seen a lot of forms of what we call institutions for collective action. Those are institutionalized forms of cooperating, of collective use of resources. We've seen them in the countryside, for example, farmers working together and using farmland, but also pasture land together. And that's what the term commons refers to. And commons, a lot of people think of anything that could be used collectively, but originally it really stems from farmers all over Europe and from the late medieval period until the end of the 18th century, who used natural resources together. In the cities, we've seen many different examples that actually could inspire present-day citizens, both in terms of working together professionally, like if you look at the historical guilds, where occupational groups got together and shared several resources together, but also set up services like insurances in case of health issues, insurances in case of fire, etc. So that's a type of institution for collective action where you could get inspiration. But there's also other types of institutions within the city that have developed, also here in Brussels, for example. Not so far from here, you have the leftovers basically of a former beguinage, which was a community of semi-religious women who lived together. And their main collective resource was not just the housing and the facilities they created, sometimes even a farm within their community, within the city, but their main resource was mainly safety. They got together in order to make sure that they, as women, single women, could live safely within the city full of dangerous men, and they could actually, in that way also, manage to survive, also work as independent women. So I think there's plenty of inspiration to be found within the historical development. Well, I think something we already see in quite a few other countries and in specific sectors that really can lead to a stronger movement is that there's the development of a sort of network within among these forms of citizen collectivities. We see that in some countries, like all over Europe, basically in energy cooperatives. What we see is, for example, in the Netherlands, we see examples of that in care, in agriculture. In Belgium, you also see it in agriculture, for example. And I think what is really important to make sure that there's more of these experiments, more examples popping up among citizens, and that they actually take the initiative, is first of all that knowledge about this is shared. And it's not just about the legal side or how do you buy land or very, very technical and practical issues. It's also about learning to work together, learning to set up organizations that are capable of surviving many years, and so that they are not just for the next 10 years, but hopefully much longer. So it's not just about the technical side, it's definitely also about the soft skills you need to set up these citizen collectivities. That knowledge sharing can be done in different ways, but what we do see already happening is that within sectors networks to exchange this knowledge and also to lobby for their cause are being set up. And that's often a good way for new people to find their way in the maze of legal but also very practical issues. And that's quite different also from the previous waves of similar types of institutions we've seen in the long ago past, in the early modern and the medieval period. There were a lot of these institutions all over Europe, but they disappeared end of the 18th century due to government interference. And they were disappearing very rapidly. And that was mainly because they did not work together. They did not exchange a lot of knowledge among themselves. They were very weak as a movement, so to speak. Mm-hmm. They were not really a movement. They were individual guilds, individual commons. They did not work together. So when the government decided this is not how we want to organize the future and abolish these institutions, they were easily abolished. In the second wave that came towards the end of the 19th and early 20th century, you see cooperatives popping up all over Europe. And they did not disappear because of government interference, but often because they became, they got merged with other types of cooperatives. So they really choose a merger strategy. But because of that, internally, there also have been problems with internal decision-making process. So people do not necessarily have access to decision-making process internally anymore when an organization becomes very large. And that's something to take into account for the future for current organizations that are trying to work together and set up an internal democracy, that it's often better to not become too large, but unite with others in a network without losing your own identity. And that's something that we really see happening right now in many different sectors across Europe. But the ultimate way forward probably is when different collectivities from different sectors would also exchange that knowledge. So what we see is there's a huge network of co-housing organizations, and they talk to each other. And there's a huge network of energy cooperatives, but there's little communication between, for example, the co-housing sector and energy cooperatives. There's some, but no collaboration. The same goes for care cooperatives. So they really live within their own sector, their own world, so to say. And I think there's a lot to be learned from each other, if only they would form a network among them. Definitely academics have a huge role to play in this. Although there's, on the one hand, experiential knowledge, so the knowledge that is shared among citizens about how to do this and what is the best way to move forward. And there's the more expert academic knowledge, right? As academics, I think we have a huge responsibility in, on the one hand, studying these organizations, but also bringing back the knowledge that we find on the basis of our studies. And this can be done in many different ways. Within my own research group, we're setting up a knowledge exchange platform whereby we involve the citizens themselves and their collectivities to deliver the knowledge, the data and the information about their collectivity, and to also ask scientists to come forward with research methods to research their own movement. So that there's different ways to go about this. But I think the dialogue between societal partners, in this case citizen collectivities, cooperatives of all sorts, and academics can definitely be improved, but it will take an effort from both sides, I think, not just from the societal partners, definitely also from the academics. I think what we really need is that we become, as citizens, more creative to fill in the huge gap between, on the one hand, resource management by the government, by states, governments both local and anything above, and on the other hand, resource management by private partners. Within, there's a huge spectrum of possibilities still to provide in both public services and private services. And for some reason in the not so distant past, over the past 200 years, we've actually sort of forgotten what can be done in between those two ends of the spectrum. I think what's happening now is sort of reinventing different constellations, different types of cooperation between citizens. And I think it's really good that we try to figure out as citizens in a more active way what the options are. I don't think that it's a solution to leave all the problems we have as citizens or all the needs we have as citizens to the market and wait and see whether the market responds and fills them up, because often the market does not respond. If there's no critical mass in demand, if there's the conditions, the local conditions aren't good, the market might not respond. I think it's too risky to leave all of this to the market. On the other hand, in the welfare state, we have also come to rely very heavily on what the government provides. And I think many people have also forgotten to what extent we are relying and dependent on good institutions, on good provisions by government. I think what we have learned during the COVID crisis, during the whole pandemic, is that the state has a very important role as a coordination mechanism, as a way to make sure that solidarity among citizens becomes visible, that people understand what solidarity is, and that has been quite difficult, it has been shown. But the government also has a responsibility, I think, in thinking more thoroughly about how you implement this, and that's had been a problem in some areas. One of the things I was quite disappointed about during the pandemic is that there's, in fact, in implementing very necessary measures to encourage people to follow, certain very hygienic rules, but also get vaccinated. In that implementation, the possibilities that are there among citizens through local organizations, both cultural, sports organizations, but also groups of citizens, for example, in co-housing organizations. The possibilities to get those people involved in sending the message about what should be done to battle this pandemic, that has not been taken up by the government. In some countries, the networks among active citizens are huge, and there's people very willing to help out, but they have not been asked to do so. So I think the government really has overlooked what active citizens can mean in times of a pandemic. On the other hand, I think a lot of people have also felt, at least in the beginning of the pandemic, what it really means to show solidarity. But we've seen that this sort of this one-off collective action, this one-off type of solidarity, it doesn't last. People at some point they do think, okay, there should be some reciprocity for my solidarity, and that's something that we do see happening within many of these citizen collectivities. That people they contribute to, for example, a care collective or an energy cooperative, and they also know what they will get back. And I think in many cases that kind of visible, tangible solidarity is important to keep people enthusiastic. And during the pandemic, it has not been possible to stick to that kind of solidarity. So that's a bit disappointing in a way. I really hate this kind of thing, so you can put it on tape. Yeah, I really don't like it. No.